The doorbell rang at 7 in the morning. 7 in the morning on a Tuesday when my husband David was supposedly at his business conference in Chicago. 7 in the morning when I was still in my pajamas, still believing my marriage was just going through a rough patch. I stumbled to the door, expecting maybe a package or a neighbor with car trouble. Instead, I found 3 men in matching blue uniforms standing on my porch like some kind of bizarre morning militia. The one in front held a clipboard and wore the kind of professional smile that immediately made my stomach drop. "Mrs. Richardson, we're here from Premier Moving Services. We have authorization to pack and relocate your belongings today." The words hit me like ice water. Authorization. My belongings. Today. I stood there in my silk pajamas, my coffee-stained robe, staring at these strangers who apparently knew more about my Tuesday morning plans than I did. There must be some mistake. The words came out smaller than I intended. I didn't call any movers. The clipboard man's smile never wavered. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "We have written authorization from David Richardson. He's asked us to pack your personal items. There's a note here for you." My hands trembled as I took the paper. David's handwriting. That familiar scrawl that used to leave me love notes in my lunch bag, that signed birthday cards with promises of forever. Now it delivered a different kind of message entirely. "Pack your things. Natalie is taking over. The house needs to be ready by Friday. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, D." The world tilted. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. As if 23 years of marriage was just an inconvenience he needed cleared away before the weekend. "Ma'am," clipboard man was still smiling that terrible professional smile. "We can give you a few minutes to get dressed, but we do need to get started. We have a full day scheduled." I closed the door and leaned against it. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. Natalie. The name I'd seen pop up on David's phone over the past few months. The colleague he mentioned a little too often. The woman he said was just helping with the Morrison account. The woman who was apparently taking over my house. My house. The Victorian we'd bought as newlyweds with the down payment my grandmother left me. The house where I'd painted every room by hand. The house where David and I had planned to grow old together before cancer took away our chance for children, before his business consumed him, before we became strangers sharing a mortgage. I walked to the kitchen window and looked out at our backyard, the garden I'd spent 15 years perfecting, the oak tree where David had hung the swing he promised would be for our kids someday. The life I'd built bloom by bloom, season by season, while he was apparently building another one somewhere else. My phone buzzed, a text from David. "Movers should be there by now. I'll cover first month's rent on an apartment. We'll discuss details when I'm back." When he was back, from his business conference, with Natalie probably, had she been there all along? Had they been planning this while I was home watering plants and wondering why my husband had grown so distant? Another buzz. "This is for the best, Claire. We both know this hasn't been working." For the best. As if he was performing some kind of mercy killing on our marriage. As if 23 years could be diagnosed terminal and put out of its misery by moving truck. I texted back. "How long has this been planned?" The 3 dots appeared and disappeared. Appeared and disappeared. Then nothing. The doorbell rang again. I could hear clipboard man talking to his crew through the thin morning air. "Mrs. Richardson needs a few minutes. We'll start with the garage while she gets ready." The garage, where David kept his tools, his golf clubs, his wine collection, his precious 1987 Camaro that he spent every Saturday morning polishing. They were going to pack my things but leave his untouched. Of course they were. I threw on jeans and a sweater, my hands still shaking. In the mirror, I looked exactly like what I was. A 48-year-old woman whose life had just been dismantled by clipboard and 3 men in matching uniforms. When I opened the door again, they were efficient as surgeons. 2 of them were already in the living room, wrapping my grandmother's china in tissue paper. The 3rd was disassembling the bookshelf that held my collection of first editions. "Excuse me," I managed. "How exactly does this work? What are you taking?" Clipboard man consulted his notes. Personal belongings. Clothing, books, personal effects. Furniture remains with the house. Mr. Richardson was very specific about the inventory. Personal effects. 23 years reduced to personal effects. The Christmas ornaments I'd collected from every vacation, the photo albums documenting a marriage that was apparently over, the coffee mug David bought me that said, "World's Best Wife," before he decided I wasn't even good enough to get a conversation about divorce. Where are you taking everything? Premier Storage on Highland. Unit 247. You'll get the key and access codes. Storage Unit 247. My life in a 10 by 10 box while Natalie stretched out in my king-sized bed. I watched them work. They were good at it. Quick, careful, professional. They'd clearly done this before. How many other wives had they erased on a Tuesday morning? How many other lives had they efficiently boxed up and shipped out to make room for the newer model? One of them was in my bedroom now. I could hear dresser drawers opening and closing. Another was in my study, the room where I'd spent the last 5 years building my freelance editing business after the company I worked for downsized me out. The room David said I could have because it was too small for a real office anyway. My phone rang. My sister Jennifer. "Claire, are you okay? I just had the weirdest dream about you. I woke up with this terrible feeling." I started laughing. Terrible, hysterical laughter that made the moving men glance at each other nervously. "Claire, what's wrong?" "David sent movers to pack my things. I'm being evicted from my own marriage." Silence. Then, Jennifer's voice, sharp and furious. "He what?" "There's a note. Natalie is taking over. Apparently, this is for the best." "I'm coming over." "Jen, don't. I need to figure out what to do here." "What you're going to do is call a lawyer. Today. Right now." A lawyer, of course. But which lawyer? David knew every attorney in town through his business network. He'd probably already retained the best ones, made sure I'd be stuck with whoever was left. I walked through my house as they dismantled it. The living room where David and I used to watch movies on Sunday nights. The kitchen where I'd cooked his favorite meals for 2 decades. The dining room where we'd hosted Christmas dinners and anniversary parties and all the small celebrations that make a life. They were packing the dinner plates but leaving the dining room table. My grandmother's china but not the cabinet it lived in. The photo albums but not the frames on the mantel. Taking the memories but leaving the stage where they'd been performed. In my study, I watched them box up my client files, my reference books, the awards I'd won for my editing work, the business I'd built from nothing while David was climbing his corporate ladder. The independence I'd carved out in this small room when I realized my marriage was slowly starving me. And that's when I remembered. The filing cabinet in the corner, the locked drawer that held my business records, tax returns, contracts, bank statements for my separate account. The account David didn't know about because he'd stopped paying attention to my work years ago, dismissed it as a hobby that kept me busy. The account where I'd been slowly, carefully saving money, not for anything specific. Just because something deep in my gut had been telling me to create a safety net, even though I couldn't have articulated why. The moving man was reaching for the filing cabinet. "Wait." My voice came out stronger than I expected. "That stays." He looked at his clipboard. "Ma'am, this is listed as office furniture and personal files." "The files are my business. They're not personal belongings, they're professional documents. You can't take those without my business partner's authorization." It was a lie. I didn't have a business partner. But Clipboard Man didn't know that. And I could see him calculating whether this was worth an argument with a woman who looked like she might be approaching a complete breakdown. "Let me make a call," he said. He stepped outside with his phone. Through the window I could see him talking animatedly, checking his paperwork, shaking his head. When he came back, he looked annoyed. "Mr. Richardson says the files can stay, but the cabinet goes." Fine. I had 15 minutes while they packed the rest of my life. 15 minutes to grab the most important papers and hide them somewhere David wouldn't think to look. I unlocked the drawer with fingers that barely worked. Bank statements showing my separate savings account. Tax records for my editing business that had been quietly growing year by year. The deed to the house with my grandmother's name on it, the deed David had never actually read carefully because he'd assumed the house became his automatically when we married. And there it was. The document I'd forgotten about until this moment. The prenuptial agreement David had insisted on 23 years ago. The agreement he'd pushed for when his first company went public, and he wanted to protect his assets. The agreement I'd signed reluctantly because I loved him and wanted him to feel secure. The agreement that had seemed so one-sided at the time, protecting his business interests, his investments, his property acquired before marriage. But also, in subsection C of paragraph 4, protecting property inherited by either party. Property like the house my grandmother had left me, the house I'd owned outright before I married David. The house that had technically remained mine under the prenup, even though we'd lived in it as ours for over 2 decades. I stuffed the papers into my laptop bag just as clipboard man returned to supervise the cabinet removal. "Ma'am, we're almost finished here. The truck will be loaded within the hour. Did you want to do a final walkthrough?" A final walkthrough of my own house, like I was checking out of a hotel room instead of being evicted from my life. Yes, I walked through each room one more time, the rooms they'd stripped of my presence while leaving David's fingerprints on everything, his golf trophies on the mantel, his leather chair that I'd never been allowed to sit in, his collection of whiskey bottles that cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. In the bedroom, they'd taken my clothes but left his closet untouched, my jewelry box but not his expensive watch collection, my books from the nightstand but not his stack of business magazines. The bathroom told the same story. My makeup, gone. My prescription bottles, packed away. But his cologne still sat on the counter like he was marking territory. They'd erased me, but left the house completely habitable for David and his replacement. I stood in the front yard and watched them load the truck. 23 years of my personal effects fit in about half of a moving van. That's what my marriage had amounted to. That's what I was worth in cardboard boxes and packing tape. Clipboard man handed me a key and a piece of paper with an access code. Unit 247, Highland Storage. Any questions, call the number on the card. The truck pulled away, just like that. By 10:30 on a Tuesday morning, I'd been efficiently removed from my own life. I sat in my car in the driveway of the house that might still be legally mine and called the number Jennifer had texted me 20 minutes earlier. "Anderson and Associates, this is Patricia. I'd like to speak with someone about a divorce. Today, if possible. It's urgent." "What's the nature of the urgency?" "My husband just had me evicted from our house by moving company. I need to know where I stand legally." "Can you be here at 2 o'clock?" "Yes." I drove to Highland Storage. Unit 247 was exactly what you'd expect. A metal box filled with the remnants of a life. I stood in the doorway looking at my possessions stacked floor to ceiling. My grandmother's china next to my college photo albums, my business awards mixed in with winter clothes and kitchen gadgets. This was supposed to be temporary, I told myself. Just until I figured out my next move. Just until I landed somewhere new. But standing there in that storage unit, I felt something I hadn't felt since the movers arrived at 7 that morning. I felt angry. Not sad. Not heartbroken. Not devastated. Furious. David thought he could erase me like a phone number he no longer needed. Pack me away like seasonal decorations. Make room for Natalie like I was furniture he'd grown tired of. He'd forgotten one crucial thing, though. I wasn't just the woman he'd married 23 years ago. I wasn't just the supportive wife who'd put her career on hold to build him up. I wasn't just the personal effect he could have moved out on a Tuesday morning. I was the woman who'd survived cancer scares and job losses and his emotional absence. I was the woman who'd built a business from nothing in a spare room he'd dismissed. I was the woman whose grandmother had been smart enough to leave her property in a way that protected it from exactly this situation. And I was the woman who'd spent the last 5 years editing legal documents for divorce attorneys. I knew exactly how these things worked. I knew every trick, every loophole, every way a vindictive spouse might try to hide assets or manipulate circumstances. I knew, for instance, that you can't just evict someone from a house they legally own, even if you're married to them. I locked the storage unit and drove to Anderson and Associates. Margaret Anderson was nothing like I expected. 50s, gray suit, the kind of handshake that meant business. Her office smelled like leather and ambition. "Tell me what happened." I told her. Everything. The movers at 7 a.m., the note, Natalie taking over, David's texts claiming this was for the best, the storage unit. The 23 years reduced to personal effects. She listened without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. Do you have the prenuptial agreement? I pulled it from my laptop bag. She read it carefully, flipping back and forth between pages. This is interesting, very interesting. Your husband's attorney wasn't as thorough as he thought he was. What do you mean? The house. It's protected under subsection C. Inherited property remains with the inheriting spouse unless specifically transferred. Is your name on the deed? It was my grandmother's house. I inherited it outright. David's name was added to the mortgage when we refinanced, but I don't think he's on the actual deed. Her smile was sharp as winter. We need to verify that. Today. But if I'm right, your husband just illegally evicted you from your own property. What does that mean? It means he's about to have a very bad day. We spent the next hour going through documents. My separate bank account that David didn't know about. My business income that had been steadily growing. The life insurance policies where I was still the beneficiary. All the financial loose ends that accumulate over 23 years of marriage. Here's what we're going to do, Margaret said. First, we're going to the courthouse to pull the deed records. If that house is yours, we're going to have a very different conversation with your husband than he's expecting. The courthouse clerk was bored and efficient. She pulled the records for our address without looking up from her computer screen. There it was. The deed showing my grandmother as original owner. The transfer showing me as sole inheritor. And there, 2 lines down, the mortgage refinance showing David Richardson as co-borrower but not co-owner. He'd been living in my house for 23 years and never bothered to check who actually owned it. This changes everything, Margaret said. He can't evict you from property you own. He can't authorize movers to remove you from your own home. And he certainly can't move his girlfriend in without your permission. We drove back to my house. David's car was in the driveway. He was home early from his business conference. I could see him through the kitchen window, talking on his phone, pacing the way he did when he was closing a big deal. Probably talking to Natalie, telling her the coast was clear, that his wife had been efficiently disposed of. Margaret parked behind his car, blocking him in. Ready for this? No, I wasn't ready. 23 years of marriage don't end with a conversation on a Tuesday afternoon. But 23 years of being taken for granted were about to end, and I was definitely ready for that. We walked up to the door. My door. The door to my house that my husband had illegally evicted me from 6 hours earlier. I used my key. David looked up from his phone call when we walked in. His face went through several expressions very quickly. Surprise, annoyance, confusion, and then something that might have been fear. Claire, what are you doing here? I thought you'd be getting settled somewhere. Somewhere. I kept my voice level. You mean somewhere other than my own home? He ended his phone call without saying goodbye. This is my attorney, Margaret Anderson. She wanted to meet you. David's confidence faltered for just a moment. Attorney? Margaret stepped forward with her briefcase smile. Mr. Richardson, I think there's been some confusion about property ownership. We need to discuss the events of this morning. What's to discuss? Claire and I are separating. I arranged for her belongings to be moved. It's a private matter. Actually, it's not. Margaret opened her briefcase and pulled out the deed records. This house is solely owned by your wife. You had no legal authority to have her removed from her own property. David stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. That's impossible. We've lived here 20 years. It's the marital home. Inherited property, protected by prenup. Your prenup, Mr. Richardson, the one you insisted on. I watched my husband's face as he processed this information. 23 years of marriage had taught me to read his expressions. This was David realizing he'd made a crucial miscalculation. The prenup doesn't matter now. We're getting divorced. Everything gets divided. Margaret's smile grew sharper. Actually, that prenup matters quite a lot, especially the part about inherited property remaining with the inheriting spouse. Also, the part about business assets acquired before marriage being protected. Your business assets, Mr. Richardson. But it works both ways. David sank into his leather chair, the chair that sat in my living room in my house. What do you want? I looked around the room they'd stripped of my presence 12 hours earlier, the spaces where my belongings had been. The empty bookshelf, the bare end tables, the walls with lighter rectangles where my pictures had hung. I want my things back. Today. I want Natalie to understand that she won't be taking over anything that belongs to me. And I want you to remember that for 23 years, I was the one who made this house a home while you were building your empire. David's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and I caught a glimpse of the name on the screen, Natalie. She's probably wondering how the move-in went, I said. You should probably tell her there's been a change of plans. Margaret was reviewing her notes. Mr. Richardson, having someone illegally removed from their own property is a serious matter. There could be criminal charges. But I'm sure we can work something out if everyone's reasonable. David looked at me like he was seeing me clearly for the first time in years. What do you want, Claire? What did I want? 6 hours ago, I'd wanted my marriage to work. I'd wanted my husband to remember that he loved me. I'd wanted to go back to being the couple who hung swings for children we'd never have. But standing in my living room, looking at the man who'd tried to erase me with moving boxes and a clipboard, I realized I wanted something else entirely. I wanted my dignity back. I wanted my power back. I wanted to remember who I'd been before I'd spent 20 years making myself smaller to make him feel bigger. I want you to call Premier Moving and have them bring everything back. Today. I want you to call Natalie and explain that your housing situation has become complicated. And then I want you to pack your things and find somewhere else to stay while we work out the details of our divorce. You're evicting me? The irony was delicious. I'm asking you to leave. There's a difference. He made the calls. Premier Moving would return my belongings by 5 o'clock. The storage unit fee would be refunded. The inconvenience fee would be waived. The call to Natalie was harder to overhear. David walked into the kitchen, but the house wasn't that big. I caught fragments. Complications. Legal issues. Need some time. When he came back, he looked older somehow. Smaller. How long have you known? I asked. Known what? About Natalie. About wanting out. About planning this whole thing. He sat heavily in his chair. Months. Maybe longer. We've been growing apart, Claire. You know we have. Growing apart because you were growing towards someone else. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Margaret cleared her throat. Mr. Richardson, I'll need contact information for your attorney. We have a lot to discuss regarding asset division, spousal support, and the illegal eviction incident. David gave her his lawyer's information, like he was signing his own arrest warrant. After Margaret left, we sat in the living room where we'd spent so many evenings as a married couple. The space felt different now, charged with the electricity that comes after lightning strikes. I never meant to hurt you, David said finally. But you did hurt me. You packed away 23 years like it was garbage you wanted removed before the neighborhood saw it. I thought it would be easier, cleaner. For who? For you and Natalie? He didn't answer, which was answer enough. Did you ever love me? I asked. Really love me? Of course I did. I do, Claire. Love isn't always enough. You're right. Sometimes you also need respect, and basic human decency, and the courtesy of a conversation before you call the movers. The Premier Moving truck pulled up at 4:45. The same crew, looking considerably less cheerful than they had that morning. They unloaded everything with the efficiency of people who really wanted this day to be over. I supervised the return of my belongings like a general reclaiming occupied territory. The china went back in the dining room cabinet. The books returned to their shelves. The photo albums found their places on the coffee table. By 6 o'clock, the house looked like it had that morning, before the movers, before the note, before my marriage officially ended with clipboard professionalism and cardboard boxes. David packed 2 suitcases and called a hotel. This isn't over, he said at the door. No, I agreed. It's just beginning. After he left, I sat in the quiet house, my house, the home I'd built bloom by bloom, season by season, while my husband had been building a different life in another woman's arms. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. How are you holding up? I looked around my living room, my books on the shelves, my grandmother's furniture exactly where it belonged, my life unpacked and restored after 12 hours of being treated like an inconvenience. I'm not just holding up, I texted back. I think I'm waking up. Outside, The sun was setting behind the oak tree, where David had once hung a swing for children we'd never have. The garden I'd tended for 15 years was preparing for fall. The house my grandmother had been wise enough to protect was settling around me like armor made of home and memory, and the kind of strength you only discover when someone tries to pack it away in boxes. David had sent movers to remove me from my own life. But he'd forgotten one crucial thing. You can't pack away someone's power when they've been quietly building it for years. You can't evict someone from a home they legally own. And you can't erase 23 years of a woman's strength just because you've stopped paying attention to how strong she's become. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and negotiations and all the complicated business of unmaking a marriage. But tonight, I was exactly where I belonged. In my house, in my life, in my skin. Finally, awake after 23 years of sleepwalking through someone else's idea of who I should be. The movers had come at 7 a.m. to pack my things for his mistress. By 7 p.m., I'd unpacked myself right back into the life I'd forgotten was mine all along. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to be relocated. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stay exactly where you belong. In my case, it just took 3 men in matching uniforms and a clipboard to remind me that home isn't just where you live. It's where you refuse to be moved from.